Now, I've already showed you how to measure the piston skirts in a different video, but the piston skirt measurement is just this measurement right here. We're going to measure right across the skirt of the piston. What I want to show you now is how to clean the ring grooves. There's actually a tool that will clamp onto the piston that goes around and drags inside the ring groove to clean it. But I've also discovered in my years of experience that one of the best tools is if you have an old ring that you don't care about, that you're not going to reuse, you break off a chunk of it, and then you can use the old ring to put it down inside the piston groove, and you can scrape the piston groove clean with the old compression ring. So this is the compression ring that goes in this one here. So I can scrape it along here and clean out any kind of gunk, and you can see that there's some stuff coming out of there. And so this is another way that you can just clean up the piston ring grooves. Now when we go to install the pistons, or the piston rings, usually most pistons are going to have 3 sets of rings on there. They're going to have an oil ring, which is the one down here on the bottom. I'll get my pointer. So the oil ring is going to be down here, and that's usually the widest groove. And then we have 2 compression rings. And on this one here, the big compression ring is right here. This is going to be what seals the piston mostly. And then this one up here is it's got some heat treated material on here. And so it's going to be kind of deflecting a lot of the heat from coming down onto this ring here. And so what we need to do is we need to start at the bottom and work our way up when we're installing piston rings. So we're going to start with the oil rings. And I was looking on this particular engine. Now these engines have been apart by students several times, and it's missing some pieces. The oil rings usually have kind of a spacer like this, and then it has 2 of these really, really lightweight rings. So these lightweight ones go on the top and on the bottom of this. And so that's what you want to set it up as. When you're installing piston rings, you want to make sure that you don't tweak them so that they get out of round. And so when you put them on, usually you find the gap and you just kind of work your way around the piston like this until it slides down into the groove. And so on this one, this is one of the oil ring piston rings, and so I need to get it down here into the oil ring section. So it's down in there now. So the next thing to do would be to put the spacer piece in. And you see it's disconnected. Now when the spacer ring goes in there, it's going to want to latch onto itself once it gets in there, and that's the way it kind of keeps together. So we're going to go ahead and put that on there too. The oil ring isn't quite as critical because it's usually pretty flexible. The compression rings, however, are not. If you are building like a small block Chevy or Ford or Chrysler or something like that, those pistons are kind of made out of some kind of carbon impregnated steel, and they're very brittle. They break real easy, so you have to be very careful with that. So I'm going to go ahead and install this oil ring, and then I'll show you when it's completed. Okay, we're going to install the piston ring. So you start at the back where the gap of the piston ring is up here, and you just kind of work your way around the piston like this when you're installing them. And these, like I say, these piston rings aren't too critical. They're not going to break on you, but these can get bent pretty easily, so you have to be careful when you're putting them in. But the other ones on the bigger engines, they tend to have a little bit higher mortality rate, you might say, on these. Now this one, it looks like I've got part of the ring in the lower groove where it's supposed to go, and the other part is in the upper groove. So I'm just trying to work the ring around into the lower groove. So there it's in the lower groove now. So the piston, and then you want to move it around like this to make sure the piston ring is actually loose in there. It's not supposed to fit really snug and tight just yet. And then we're going to put the top one in, and it goes in the same way. So you just kind of work it in until it fits into the groove. Okay. Okay, I've got the piston rings installed. I did not install the oil ring. I was trying to install the oil ring, but it's been tweaked way too many times. We need to get a new one for this engine. The engine's not going to run right now anyway, so this piston will be installed without an oil ring. Now, if you were to do this in a live engine, that oil ring, if it was missing, oil would get thrown up into the combustion chamber, and you'd have a really smoky engine. So anyway, that's what the oil ring does. When I've got the piston rings installed, if you notice they are kind of loose on the piston, you can move them around. When you install your piston, it's kind of a good rule of thumb to put the gaps, stagger the gaps. So you have a gap here, and then the top ring is going to gap over here on the other side of the piston. And that's just a way that you can kind of ensure that the compression is going to be equal all the way around. Same thing with the oil ring, is you want to make sure your gaps are staggered with the compression rings as well. Another thing I wanted to show you before we install these is on the bottom side of these caps, these rod caps, these are called fracture fit caps. And what I mean by that is that when the cap is manufactured, so I'm going to pop these bearings out real quick and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So when the cap is manufactured, it's installed together like this, and then what they do is they score the rod, and then they break it. They break it like this. And so these right here, they're not machined smooth. And so this cap will only fit on this rod. And when it fits down nice and tight, that seam right there almost becomes invisible on the inside. And so that's what's called a fracture cap. Not all piston rods are like that. Some of them do actually have a machined thing. And if you notice on this here where you've got some stuff right here, that's where somebody has actually installed this on the wrong cap on the wrong rod, and then torqued it down, and it smashed some of the metal. So anyway, that's a fracture cap.